So let's get into the details of exactly how the rule of law has been impacted by Donald Trump's decision. Let's welcome back Elise Adamson. She's a former federal prosecutor who was at the Capitol on January 6th, and she arraigned the first insurrectionists. I'm also joined by Praveen Fernandes, Vice President at the Constitutional Accountability Center. Welcome to you both. First of all, Elise, let me start with you. So clearly this was a massive priority for Donald Trump. Why?
Well, Donald Trump cares a lot about loyalty, and these rioters exemplified the most loyal of Trump's supporters. On top of that, Donald Trump has felt aggrieved for a very long time. He felt like there was a weaponization of the Department of Justice and he was being unfairly targeted. This was all political to him. And so day one in the office, he just made it all go away with all of the pardons.
And Praveen, what message was this supposed to send, and what message has it actually sent?
It's the pardon power is so broad, and the Constitution at Article 2, Section 2, Clause 1 vests this power in the president. There are actually very few fetters on that. There's an Office of the Pardon Attorney at the Department of Justice, but really, ultimately, this vests in the president.
So he can pardon who he wants.
And he can pardon who he wants. And what a president does when they exercise that clemency power says a lot about a president and their administration. So you're asking the right question. What message does it send out when on day one of the Trump presidency, 1,500 individuals plus 14 commutations to individuals who were involved in a historic attack on the United States Capitol, an attack that was in service of overturning the results of the 2020 election. It's a terrible message for democracy.
I'm interested in that notion of rewriting history, because putting together this show, we've all been reminded of exactly what happened that day. And it doesn't need interpretation because the footage is there. But there has been this very obvious attempt to rewrite this as a day of love, as Donald Trump himself has said. What's behind that?
That's right, Amanda. And I think that's very, very dangerous. I was at the Capitol on January 6th, and I saw with my own eyes that this was a violent, riotous mob that broke into the Capitol to disturb the peaceful transfer of power. It's that simple. It was a crime of a large scale that was captured on national television. And I think we have to continue to remind people of this and tell them, to your point, just watch the footage. This is not a media soundbite. This is simply a fact. And Donald Trump has been trying to rewrite this as a day of peace and love, just his supporters supporting him. It wasn't. It was a disturbance of our democratic process through force and violence. And when we normalize that behavior, our democracy itself is at risk because it is tacit agreement that that is okay, and it simply is not.
Praveen, do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And I will only say that, even for individuals who were not there have been so many inquiries into the facts of what happened on January 6th. So this rewriting is not only in contradiction of, individuals who were there that day, but the work of the January 6th bipartisan select committee that conducted its work over almost 2 years, over 140,000 documents, over 1,000 depositions and sworn testimony. The individuals who swore testimony that, as with all congressional testimony, is subject to perjury charges if it's found false. So the facts of what happened on January 6th have actually been established over and over and over again by rigorous bodies.
We've spoken to rioters in the show who say that they were political prisoners, that they were hostages during the time they were in jail. It is a completely different perspective. As with so much of the Trump era, you have two alternate realities. They are so strong in their belief that this was doing the right thing. Will they do it again?
I fear that they will, Amanda. In my experience as a former prosecutor, if we don't hold people to account, they're likely to reoffend. Recidivism is high, and that's because they don't believe there's consequences for their actions. And here, it's even more dangerous because they've essentially been told by the President of the United States that what they did was acceptable and good. To me, that was the message that these pardons sent. And mind you, originally, the public were told that they may be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. So those individuals that engaged in violence against police officers, for instance, would not receive a pardon, but that didn't happen. The president gave a blanket pardon to all individuals. So even the most violent individuals have been handed a get out of jail free card and back on the street. And we've already seen some of these individuals reoffend in the mere weeks since the pardon. And so I think that the likely outcome of this pardon is going to be, unfortunately, more of the same. I think the question is of what scale.
And there was, I think, some urging from within his own allies saying, don't go so blanket on this. Let's look at it case by case. But what do we take from the fact that this was so sweeping?
I mean, absolutely. In the run-up to the inauguration, Vice President J.D. Vance specifically said that it would be inappropriate for violent offenders to receive that sort of pardon. And when the actual order happened on day one, that distinction between violent and non-violent offenders, that distinction was nowhere to be found in that final individual. In her confirmation hearing, Pam Bondi, who has recently been confirmed as Attorney General, in her confirmation hearing, she was asked about violence against law enforcement officials, and she condemned it. And so, you know, the notion is the president has this power, but the president has exercised this clemency power in a way that has made even members of his cabinet prior to this exercise profoundly uncomfortable because it's dissonant with the language of a law and order president.
Right, and Elise, these aren't just violent individuals. These are extremist groups who now feel very emboldened. What kind of things have they been saying since the pardons, and what can we expect in terms of how they may operate going forward?
Well, to be clear, not all of the defendants were part of extremist groups. We did have some individual actors who participated in the events of Jan 6. You're referring to groups such as the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, Enrique Tarrio, for instance, who claimed to have some kind of change of heart during his sentencing, but is now back to the media, walking it back, being proud of his behavior. And yes, I mean, these organizations are extremely dangerous. We heard through trial testimony what they had been planning, and it was a seditious conspiracy. A jury found them guilty of seditious conspiracy. And once again, now they've been emboldened. They think that what they did was correct. And who knows? I mean, the Proud Boys think that they're backing up the president. They're their own militias. We don't need that. We have a military. But they believe that they have the authority now to continue. And so I think we're going to see these extremist groups continue on with their philosophy and perhaps become even more extreme because the president has commended them for their behavior.
Yeah, Praveen, what do you make of that? Just in isolation, that you have these troubling extremist groups who would be on the radar of law enforcement, having the backing of the President of the United States. Where does that leave us in terms of the rule of law?
Well, it's incredibly troubling. It's also troubling because it's happening in concert with a rooting out at our law enforcement agencies of individuals who are seen to have been disloyal to Trump. So I'm thinking of the FBI employee questionnaires, trying to suss out who had any involvement with the January 6th investigations. These are career prosecutors and law enforcement officials who were just doing their jobs. These are individuals who remembered that they swore an oath as federal employees, not to a particular president, not to a particular administration, but rather to the Constitution. And so I'm worried that at the very moment that these dangerous individuals are back on to the streets, potentially doing new acts of political violence, but the apparatus that is in place to police and to protect the American public is being systematically dismantled.
What do you make of that, Elise? The idea of career prosecutors who are now potentially being forced out for just having worked on the processes after January 6th. I mean, again, it comes down to this idea of loyalty, doesn't it?
That's right. But as Praveen just said, a career prosecutor is not loyal to the president in office. They're loyal to the Constitution. And we're just doing their jobs. And just so viewers know, prosecutors are assigned to cases, as are FBI agents. They don't have a say in what they work on. So now the notion that they're going to be let go for just doing their job is absolutely outrageous. What else would you have them do? If you really follow that logic to conclusion, you would have civil servants anytime they believe that something would make the executive upset, that they should refuse to do their job. How would the government function? But to your point, that's how Donald Trump wants it. He wants extreme loyalty. And unfortunately, he might just get it, because if they truly were to dismiss 5,000 FBI agents, I think it is unlikely, but that's how many answered the questionnaire. That would greatly reduce the ranks of the FBI, I think by something like 13%. Don't quote me on that. That's just based on the numbers of the FBI. And so what are they going to do? We're either less safe because there are fewer federal agents working to secure America, or they're going to be replaced with Trump loyalists who, in Trump's mind, need to be loyal to him and not to the Constitution. I think either scenario is very concerning.
And just finally from you, Praveen, where does this notion of ultimate loyalty take America? Loyalty to Trump, not to the Constitution.
I think it's so corrosive to attach loyalty to an individual, to a political party, and that's why our oaths for all federal officials, not just the high officials, rank and file government employees take this oath, because their notion is the work is on behalf of the American people in service of the Constitution.
Okay, Praveen, Elise, thank you both so much for your insights.
Thank you.